Dietrich Schwarzkopf. He's not such a bad old chap. Doesn't speak such atrocious dialect unless he's had more than 5 glasses of grog. Once he was at the office, and we went together to the ship's company. He drank like a tank. His father was born on a Norwegian freighter and grew up to be captain on the very same line. Dietrich has had a good education. The pilot command is a responsible office and pretty well paid. Dietrich is an old bear, but very gallant with the ladies. Look out, he'll flirt with you. Ah, well, and his wife? I don't know her myself. She must be nice, I should think. There is a son, too. He was in first or second in my time at school, and is a student now, I expect. Look, there's the sea. We shall be there inside a quarter of an hour. They drove for a while along the shore on an avenue bordered with young beech trees. There was the water, blue and peaceful in the sunshine. The round yellow lighthouse tower came into view, and the bay and the breakwater, the red roofs of the little town, the harbor with its sails, tackle, and shipping. They drove between the first houses, past the church, and rolled along the front close to the water, and up to a pretty little house, the veranda of which was overhung with vines. Pilot Captain Schwarzkopf stood before his door and took off his seaman's cap as the caleche drove up. He was a broad, stocky man with a red face, sea-blue eyes, and a bristling, grizzled beard that ran, fan-shaped from one ear to the other. His mouth turned down at the corners, in one of which he held a wooden pipe. His smooth-shaven, red upper lip was hard and prominent. He looked thoroughly solid and respectable, with big bones and well-rounded paunch, and he wore a coat decorated with gold braid, underneath which a white pique waistcoat was visible. "Servant, mademoiselle," he said, as he carefully lifted Tony from the caleche. "We know it's an honor you do us, coming to stop with us like this. Servant, Herr Buddenbrook. Papa, well? And the honored Frau Consul? Come in, come in. My wife has some sort of a bite already, I suppose. Drive over to Pedersen's Inn," he said in his broadest dialect to the coachman, who was carrying in the trunk. "You'll find they take good care of the horses there." Then, turning to Thomas, "You'll stop the night with us, Herr Buddenbrook? Oh, yes, you must. The horses want a bait and a rest, and you wouldn't get home until after dark." "Upon my word, one lives at least as well here as at the Kurhaus," Tony said, a quarter of an hour later, as they sat around the coffee table in the veranda. "What wonderful air! You can smell the seaweed from here. How frightfully glad I am to be in Travemünde again." Between the vine-clad columns of the veranda, one could look out on the broad river mouths, glittering in the sun. There were the piers and the boats and the ferry house on the Prival opposite, the projecting peninsula of Mecklenburg. The clumsy, blue-bordered cups on the table were almost like basins. How different from the delicate old porcelain at home. But there was a bunch of flowers at Tony's place. The food looked inviting, and the drive had whetted her appetite. "Yes, mademoiselle will see. She will pick up here fast enough," the housewife said. "She looks a little poorly, if I might say so. That is the town air and the parties." Frau Schwarzkopf was the daughter of a Schlutup pastor. She was a head shorter than Tony, rather thin, and looked to be about 50. Her hair was still black and neatly dressed in a large meshed net. She wore a dark brown dress with white crocheted collar and cuffs. She was spotless, gentle, and hospitable, urging upon her guests the currant bread that lay in a boat-shaped basket, surrounded by cream, butter, sugar, and honeycomb. That sounds good. This basket had a border of breadwork embroidery done by little Meta, the 8-year-old daughter, who now sat next to her mother, dressed in a plaid frock, her flaxen hair in a thick pigtail. Frau Schwarzkopf made excuses for Tony's room, whither she had already been to make herself tidy after the journey. It was so very simple. "Oh, all the better," Tony said. It had a view of the ocean, which was the main thing, and she dipped her 4th piece of currant bread into her coffee. Tom walked with the pilot captain about the Woolenwewer, now undergoing repairs in the town. There came suddenly into the veranda a young man of some 20 years. He took off his gray felt hat, blushed, and bowed rather awkwardly. "Well, my son," said Herr Schwarzkopf, "you are late." He presented him to the guests. "This is my son, studying to be a doctor. He is spending his vacation with us." He had mentioned the young man's name, but Tony failed to understand it. "Pleased to meet you," said Tony primly. Tom rose and shook hands. Young Schwarzkopf bowed again, put down his book, and took his place at the table, blushing afresh. He was of medium height, very slender, and as fair as he could possibly be. His youthful moustaches — I know it's mustaches, but I just love saying moustaches. His youthful moustaches, colorless as the hair which covered his long head, were scarcely visible, and he had a complexion to match, a tint like translucent porcelain, which grew pink on the slightest provocation. His eyes, slightly darker than his father's, had the same not very animated but good-natured, quizzical expression, and his features were regular and rather pleasing. When he began to eat, he displayed unusually regular teeth, glistening in close ranks of polished ivory. For the rest, he wore a gray jacket buttoned up, with flaps on the pockets and an elastic belt at the back. "Yes, I am sorry I am late," he said. His speech was somewhat slow and grating. "I was reading on the beach and did not look soon enough at my watch." Then he ate silently, looking up now and then to glance at Tom and Tony. Later on, Tony being again urged by the housewife to take something, he said, "You can rely on the honey, Fraulein Buddenbrook. It is a pure nature product. One knows what one is eating. You must eat, you know. The air here consumes one. It accelerates the process of metabolism. If you do not eat well, you will get thin." He had a pleasant, naive way of now and then bending forward as he spoke and looking at some other person than the one whom he addressed. His mother listened to him tenderly and watched Tony's face to see the impression he made. But old Schwarzkopf said, Now, Herr Doctor, don't be blowing off about your metabolism. We don't know anything about that sort of talk." Whereupon the young man laughed, blushed again, and looked at Tony's plate. The pilot captain mentioned more than once his son's Christian name, but Tony could never quite catch what it was. It sounded like Moore or Mort, but the father's broad, flat pronunciation was impossible to understand. They finished their meal. Herr Diedrich sat blinking in the sun, his coat flung wide open over his white waistcoat, and he and his son took out their short pipes. Tom smoked his cigarettes, and the young people began a lively conversation, the subject of which was their old school and all the old school recollections. Tony took part gaily. They quoted Herr Stengel. "What? You were to make a line, and what are you making? A dash." What a pity Christian was not here. He could imitate him so much better. Once Tom pointed to the flowers at Tony's place and said to his sister, "That trims things up uncommonly well," as Herr Grenlich would say, whereat Tony, red with anger, gave him a push and darted an embarrassed glance at young Schwarzkopf. The coffee hour had been unusually late, and they had prolonged it. It was already 6:30, and twilight was beginning to descend over the Preval when the captain got up. "The company will excuse me," he said. "I've some work down at the pilot-house. We'll have supper at 8 o'clock if that suits the young folk, or even a little later tonight, Meta? And you," here he used his son's name again, "don't be lolling about here. Just go and dig up your bones again. Fraulein Buddenbrook will want to unpack, or perhaps the guests would like to go down on the beach, only don't get in the way." "Diedrich, for pity's sake, why shouldn't he sit still a bit?" Frau Schwarzkopf said with mild reproach. "And if our guests like to go down onto the beach, why shouldn't he go along? Is he to see nothing at all of our visitors?" Chapter 6. In her neat little room with the flower-covered furniture, Tony woke next morning with the fresh, happy feeling which one has at the beginning of a new chapter. She sat up in bed, and with her hands clasped round her knees and her tousled head flung back, blinked at the stream of light that poured through the closed shutters into the room. She began to sort out the experiences of the previous day. Her thoughts scarcely touched upon the Grunlick affair. The town, his hateful apparition in the landscape room, the exhortations of her family and Pastor Colling, all that lay far behind her. Here, every morning, there would be a carefree waking. These Schwarzkopfs were splendid people. Last night there had been pineapple punch, and they had made a party of a happy family circle. It had been very jolly. Herr Schwarzkopf had told his best sea tales, and young Schwarzkopf stories about student life at Göttingen. How odd it was that she still did not know his first name. And she had strained her ear to hear, too, but even at dinner she did not succeed, and somehow it did not seem proper to ask. She tried feverishly to think how it sounded. Was it Moore? Mord? Anyhow, she had liked him pretty well, this young Moore or Mord. He had such a sly, good-natured laugh when he asked for the water, and called it by letters and numbers, so that his father got quite furious. But it was only the scientific formula for water, that is, for ordinary water, for the Travemund product was a much more complicated affair, of course. Why, one could find a jellyfish in it any time. The authorities, of course, might have what notions they chose about fresh water. For this he only got another scolding from his father for speaking slightingly of the authorities. But Frau Schwarzkopf watched Tony all the time to see how much she admired the young man. And really, it was most interesting. He was so learned and so jolly all at the same time. He had given her considerable attention. She had complained that her head felt hot while eating and that she must have too much blood. What had he replied? He had given her a careful scrutiny and then said, yes, the arteries in the temples might be full, but that did not prove that she had too much blood. Perhaps instead it meant she had too little, or rather that there were too few red corpuscles in it. In fact, she was perhaps a little anemic. The cuckoo sprang out of its carven house on the wall and cuckooed several times, clear and loud. 7, 8, 9, counted Tony. Up with you. She jumped out of bed and opened the blinds. The sky was partly overcast, but the sun was visible. She looked out over the Lichtenfels with its tower to the ruffled sea beyond. On the right it was bounded by the curve of the Mecklenburg coast. But before her it stretched on and on till its blue and green streaks mingled with the misty horizon. I'll bathe afterwards, she thought, but first I'll eat a big breakfast so as not to be consumed by my metabolism. She washed and dressed with quick, eager movements. It was shortly after 9:30 when she left her room. The door of the chamber in which Tom had slept stood open. He had risen early and driven back to town. Even up here in the upper story it smelled of coffee. They seemed to be the characteristic odor of the little house, for it grew stronger as she descended the simple staircase with its plain board baluster and went down to the corridor, where lay the living room, which was also the dining room and the office of the pilot captain. She went out onto the veranda, looking, in her white pique frock, perfectly fresh and in the gayest of tempers. Frau Schwarzkopf sat with her son at the table. It was already partly cleared away, and the housewife wore a blue-checked kitchen apron over her brown frock. A key basket stood beside her. "1,000 pardons for not waiting," she said as she stood up. "We simple folk rise early. There is so much to be done. Schwarzkopf is in his office. I hope you don't take it ill?" Tony excused herself in her turn. "You must not think I always sleep so late as this," she said. "I feel very guilty, but the punch last night—" The young man began to laugh. He stood behind the table with his short pipe in his hand and a newspaper before him. "Good morning." Oops, I thought it was going to be the boy speaking. "Good morning," Tony said. "Yes, it is your fault. You kept urging me. Now I deserve only cold coffee. I ought to have had breakfast and a bath as well by this time." "Oh no, that would be rather too early for a young lady. At 7 o'clock the water was rather cold, 11 degrees. That's pretty sharp under a warm bed." "How do you know I wanted a warm bath, monsieur?" And Tony sat down beside Frau Schwarzkopf. "Oh, you have kept the coffee hot for me, Frau Schwarzkopf, but I will pour it out myself. Thank you so much." The housewife looked on her as her guest began to eat. "Fraulein slept well the first night?" "The mattress, dear knows, is only stuffed with seaweed. We are simple folk. And now, good appetite and a good morning. You will surely find many friends on the beach. If you like, my son shall bear you company. Pardon me for not sitting longer, but I must look after the dinner. The joint is in the oven. We will feed you as well as we can." "I shall stick to the honeycomb," Tony said when the two were alone. "You know what you are getting." Young Schwarzkopf laid his pipe on the veranda rail. "But please smoke. I don't mind it at all. At home, when I come down to breakfast, Papa's cigar smoke is already in the room. Tell me," she said suddenly, "is it true that an egg is as good as 1/4 of a pound of meat?" He grew red all over. "Are you making fun of me?" he asked, partly laughing but partly vexed. "I got another wigging from my father last night for what he calls my silly professional airs." "No, really, I was asking because I wanted to know." Tony stopped eating in consternation. How could anybody call them airs? I should be so glad to learn something. I'm such a goose, you see. At Sesame Whitebrook's, I was always one of the very laziest. I'm sure you know a great deal. Inwardly, her thoughts ran. Everybody puts his best foot foremost before strangers. We all take care to say what will be pleasant to hear. That is a commonplace. Well, you see, I apologize, it's so hard when a new paragraph starts with parentheses. I don't know who's talking. I don't know what voice to do, and my voices are silly. Well, you see, they are the same thing. Okay, this is him. Well, remember he talked in a slow and kind of grating voice? Well. Okay, I'm sorry. Well, you see, they are the same thing in a way. The chemical constitutes of foodstuffs, and so on while Tony breakfasted. Next, they talked about Tony's boarding school days and Sesame Whitebrook and Gerda Arnoldson, who had gone back to Amsterdam, and Armgard von Schilling, whose home, a large white house, could be seen from the beach here, at least in clear weather. Tony finished eating, wiped her mouth, and asked, pointing to the paper, "Is there any news?" There's our timer. Young Schwarzkopf shook his head and laughed cynically.